How's it going, everybody? Welcome back to The Mindful Hunter, and I'm your host as always, Jay Nichol. And today we're going to get into the 7 pieces of clothing that I think you need in order to go sheep hunting. Now, I need to give credit where credit is due. This is originally based on a framework put out by John Barklow, except he uses 8 instead of 7, and we're going to get into why I adapted it the way that I did. John's a madman and just a font of information. So in no way do I disagree with his 8. It's just that from the situations I tend to find myself in, and limited budget and the rest of it, I think you can get away with 7. Now, another thing to note is that this system is brand agnostic. I'm going to show you how I fulfill the system with Sitka gear, but you could use any other hunting brand. You could use a combination of hunting brands. And more importantly, you could even use non-hunting brands. I think that's a great budget tip for people. I know in Canada, here there's a website called The Last Hunt, and they always have like Merrill and Helly Hansen and Black Diamond and Outdoor Research and Arc'teryx stuff at the end of the season for 50, 60, 70% off, and it comes in weird colors. But if you're on a budget and you just want to be in some technical gear, I think that's a fantastic way to satisfy the system and stay within a budget. Something else that's really important, if you're going to take anything away from this video, I want you to take away the principle of thinking of your clothing as a system and not as just as individual pieces like I need a pair of pants or I need a shirt. If you think of it as a system, it not only helps you make decisions when it comes to different seasons, like, okay, if this is my base system, now if I'm going into a different season, what elements of that system need to change in order to account for the new system? Like, okay, I did a sheep hunt in August. I wore a certain list of clothes. Now I'm going to be doing an elk hunt 6 weeks later. You don't need to start from scratch. It's like, what's 1 or 2 things that are going to be different? Maybe it's going to be a couple degrees cooler. Maybe the chance of rain is slightly higher. And so you can look at your system and say, what pieces do I need to swap out in order to account for this change? And finally, another really powerful element of this system is that it's going to help you make buying decisions. So if you're considering a new piece of gear, you can say to yourself, what does this replace? Or what new versatility would this add to my system? And do I need that versatility? Or am I buying something that another piece of gear actually does just as well? A really good example of this for me is the Sitka Core Heavyweight Hoodie and the Sitka Kelvin Active Jacket. I have both, but I don't need both. I think they both serve so close to the same function that if you were on a tight budget, I would just recommend one. And my personal preference would be the Kelvin Active Jacket. Now, there are minuscule benefits and deficiencies to either of those pieces in contrast to each other in different situations. But in general, those 2 pieces of gear serve almost the exact same function. So I just wanted to get that out there. So what are these 7 pieces that I recommend? Okay, base layer times 2, top and bottom. I'm going to go through the system first, and then we're actually going to get into what pieces of gear I use to satisfy the system. So base layer times 2, 1 top, 1 bottom, a soft shell pant, a layer of active insulation. Active insulation is something that you can wear while hiking. It's warm, but it's also going to have an element of breathability to it, and it's not going to be so warm that you sweat like a pig as soon as you start hiking. Up next, we have your Windstopper layer. Now, this is the layer that I do not tend to bring that differentiates my system from John's system. Typically, I just use my rain gear for this. If you're already wearing your layer of active insulation and the wind picks up, you start to get cold while you're hiking or while you're sitting, you can throw your rain jacket on and it will cut that wind down to nothing. Now, I do think there are examples when a purebred Windstopper layer is beneficial. For example, when you are in particularly cold, dry, and windy conditions. For example, I was mule deer hunting in southern Alberta, and I brought the mountain jacket from Sitka, and it was ideal. And I actually layer it underneath my puffy jacket, And the puffy jacket would keep me insulated and warm, and the mountain jacket would cut out the wind before it reached my body. It was a fantastic system. However, for most of the places I hunt, I'm going to be expecting a bit of rain anyways. I'm from BC, and so it just doesn't really make a lot of sense for me to carry that 8th layer of Windstopper. Now, one piece I would like to start experimenting with is a Windstopper vest. They make a mountain vest from Sitka that I think would still be so lightweight that there would almost be no penalty for bringing it along, and would still keep that kind of core area protected from the heat robbing capabilities of strong wind. Next up, we have static insulation. Typically, this is going to be your large puffy. You're going to put this on when you sit down to glass, if you're sitting at camp at night. A lot of people will wear this to bed depending on the temperature rating of the sleeping bag that they have brought. And most importantly, now this is where you start to see the power of the layering system. If you're not moving and it's not terribly cold, you can just go base layer, static insulation. If it is particularly cold, you're glassing, you go base layer, active insulation, static insulation. Now, if it's really windy, wet, and cold, you go base layer, active insulation, static insulation, then rain jacket. And you'll see with the stuff that I brought on my sheep hunt this year, there is literally no combination of circumstances that you can't deal with 7 pieces of gear. And then finally, as I've already alluded to, we have rain gear. And I think, again, if you're on budget, buy something middle of the road, not too heavy, not too light, something a little more versatile. If you have a bit more of a budget, my recommendation is to buy like an ultra light and an ultra heavy system. So I have the Stormfront system and the Dew Point system. And when I'm going on hunts where there is a mild chance of rain, or I'm essentially not expecting to be actively hunting in wet conditions the majority of the hunt, I bring the Dew Point. If I'm in a situation like coastal blacktail or late season February goat, I bring the Stormfront, because I'm essentially going to be living in that rain gear for a week. That's what I did last February up in northern BC. Is I didn't even bring a soft shell pant. I only brought long johns and the Stormfront system, and I literally just wore a heavy gauge long underwear and the Stormfront pants. And that system kept me dry and warm. And I had Puffy Pants as a backup. And that's another element that we could go back and forth on that technically would bring you back up to 8 if you brought bottoms to your Puffy Pants. Here's something kind of funny about me. I have brought Puffy Pants on no less than 7 hunts, and I have never actually put them on my body. Not one time. I don't know if it's just because my lower body doesn't tend to get very cold, or I think about it and it's too much of a pain in the ass, but I got to get to the point where I just stop bringing them. Little side note, I'm going on a mule deer hunt in a month, and I'm going to be testing out the new Aerolite system from Sitka. So it's basically a bag, a synthetic bag that doesn't go down, only goes down to 30 degrees, so it's not super warm. So they're expecting you to layer up some kind of puffy system. So on that particular hunt, I am going to bring some Puffy Pants and expect to be basically sleeping in the Puffy Pants inside the Aerolite bag every night. Okay, so now that we have a basic understanding of the system, base layer, soft shell pant, active insulation, static insulation, and rain gear, now we're going to go through my choices for what I took on my sheep hunt this year. Let's start with the base layers. So base layers for the bottom, I run Lululemon boxers. And this is going to kind of give something away, but I'm about to do like a mega comprehensive review of all the hiking boxers. I literally have like 6 or 7 different pairs of boxers over there, from Smartwool, Arc'teryx, Under Armour, Lululemon. I tested them all thoroughly. Lululemon blew everybody out of the water. These mesh boxers are insane. I'm not going to get into a bit of detail about these particular ones because I'm going to go into so much detail on that video. But the one note I want to make, when you are contemplating, especially your base layer, one of the questions you're going to have to answer is, do I want to run synthetic or merino? I've switched on this in recent years. I was a diehard merino guy for a long time. And then I finally tested out some synthetic stuff, And it had just, I was a tree planter years and years ago, and all the synthetic stuff we used to wear, it would stink so bad after a few days that I just really got away from running synthetics in any type of long-term backcountry situation. But the new stuff that's treated with Polygene, and listen, it's not perfect. No, it's still going to get a bit of a stank to it. But for me, the positive characteristics outweigh the lack of scent control. Essentially, this really boils down to a personal preference. I will say merino does not stink, but it lacks durability. And on the other hand, I would say synthetic dries quicker and it's far more durable. And that ability to dry quicker is really what brought me over, especially because it's the base layer. Wearing a soaking wet merino base layer is just very uncomfortable. And on most of the hunts I go on, it's not warm enough to hang dry clothes. So I use body heat to dry most of my clothes, and usually in my sleeping bag at night. And I've just found having a synthetic base layer expedites the entire process. So for me, I go synthetic. Nothing wrong with merino though, if that's your particular choice. So that one's up to you. Lululemon boxers for the win. For the bottoms, for the top, we have the Sitka Core Lightweight Hoodie. I love this piece. I have one complaint. It's stretchy, but only like 50% as stretchy as you think it would be. And I'm a big dude. I run an extra large tall, and it's a bit tight on me in the shoulders and through the arms. I'm probably gonna have to switch to a double XL in this piece. And I do feel like the fit is just, for more athletic guys, I feel like the fit is just like 10 to 15% off. It could use a little more room through the chest and slightly bigger sleeves, or give me something that has a bit more stretch to it, because there is some give. And that's the other kind of benefit synthetic has for me over the merino. Most merino these days, even the hybrid merino, by day 2 or 3 of your hunt, it's stretched out to shit. And this synthetic stuff really keeps its shape and size over the course of a hunt. I wore this shirt straight for 13 days on my sheep hunt this year, and it held up great. Came home, gave it a wash, doesn't smell. So I do like this piece, but I would err on the side of caution and go up half a size or whatever if you're on the borderline, because I do find it fits a bit snug and doesn't have as much give as I would like. Okay, moving on, soft shell pant. Now I chose to go with the mountain pant, and I'm actually super happy that I made this decision. One thing you got to think of when you're contemplating which pant to run, you can go something light that's going to dry quicker, but get wet faster and not be as durable, or you can go with something a little bit heavier, probably has a better DWR coating, but if it does get soaking wet, it's probably going to be a little bit more difficult to dry. I knew we were going to be doing a bunch of bushwhacking, and I also knew there was a really high percentage chance of some legitimate cold temperatures. So I opted for the kind of heavier end of the spectrum. I didn't go all the way to the Timberline. I don't like the fit of the Timberline. They don't really do it for me personally, but the mountain pant I thought was fantastic. It fits very similar to the Apex pant. It has a very athletic fit. There's a bit more room in the seat and the thigh than the Timberline. The material is fantastic. I love the knee pads. And this is one of those things, when I first started running Sitka, I really thought it was a gimmick. I was like, why would I want knee pads? And even some of their stuff has elbow pads. I'm like, they're just gonna piss me off. But I forced myself to leave them in for the first, long hunt that I did with the Sitka gear. And I was really shocked how practically useful they were. Every time you bend over to put your tent pegs in or put something up or go on a stalk, or there's just countless times when you're kneeling down in wet, rocky ground where the knee pads just make it a pleasure, to the point where, for instance, when I came home from the sheep hunt, I actually forget I'm not wearing knee pads for the first few days, and I go to put my knee on the tailgate and it hurts, and I go to kneel down at home on a hardwood floor, and I'm like, now I kind of want knee pads in all my pants, even just my day-to-day pants, because they're literally that useful. Love them. Can't say enough about the mountain pant. Super durable, dries pretty quick for being a heavier pant. And it is a heavier pant. I think it's 24 or 26 ounces, and it does take a while to dry. But in my opinion, it's a compromise worth making. Okay, active insulation layer, Sitka Kelvin Active Jacket. Likely my favorite piece that Sitka makes. Truly an innovative piece. I've never been a big fan of grid fleece tops. And for this active insulation layer, that's what most people are gonna run. Now, a grid fleece basically has channels cut in the fleece, which helps expedite the evaporation or the evacuation of moisture from your base layer. Because fleece, although it has a lot of great qualities and it's a synthetic, does not typically have great moisture evacuation properties. So everybody's kind of switched to this grid fleece construction. I've never been that big of a fan. I don't find them particularly warm, and by the time they do get warm, they're too bulky, and I've just never really found my fit there. Now, I am going to be running the Core heavyweight hoodie on this next hunt, just purely for testing purposes, so I will report back. But I love this layer. I've been soaking wet in it multiple times, and it still kept me warm. It dries out really quickly for what it is. Essentially, I don't even want to call it a soft shell because like it's super quiet. It doesn't have that scratchy soft shell like exterior. It has almost no waterproof component at all. Like it soaks up water if it rains. Like you can handle a little bit of mist, but it definitely doesn't have a heavy DWR coating. And it's not supposed to. You're meant to be wearing something else on top of that to deal with moisture and wind, which is why you have your either Windstopper or your rain jacket layer. And it's filled with a little bit of Primaloft. I think it's only 60 grams or 2 ounces insulation in the whole thing. But that to me is what makes it so cool. Because most puffies I've had, like the hardcore puffies, they're too hot to wear when you're doing anything but sitting. So you're either like cold when you're hiking, or you're hot when you're sitting, or if you wear it when you're hiking, you're too sweaty. I've just never been able to find that balance. But this, it breathes well enough that I can wear it while hiking when really cold. The full length zipper helps because if it starts to get a bit warm, I can literally just open up the entire front of the jacket. It's not so thick that I have problems layering it under other stuff, or I don't feel like cumbersome or overloaded when I'm wearing it. So my vote for active insulation for almost any situation is going to be the Kelvin Active Jacket, but I do want to do some more testing on some other pieces of gear because I do think there's some things worth looking at. Okay, now let's talk static insulation. Now this right here is actually a new piece to me. I've never used it yet, but I got it because of I don't want to say a failure of a piece, but I'm a pretty hardcore pure down guy. And on my recent sheep hunt, some of the failings of pure down were fairly apparent. I use a sleeping bag system to dry myself out. So I normally get in my sleeping bag in soaking wet clothes at the end of the night. And by middle of the night, I'm dry. This works really well with synthetic sleeping bags. I've had it work quite well with my down quilt in the past, but these were like marginally wet conditions. I was never really soaked. I found in the sheep hunt, there were a couple days where I was legitimately soaked, and I was only getting like 80% dry in the sleeping bag system as opposed to like before. I used to wake up with like crispy clothes, like I was bone dry. And so not only did a down quilt kind of didn't live up to what I was hoping for, my down puffy kind of got a bit of moisture in it halfway through the hunt, and until we got a couple of days of sun where I could just bake it for half a day, it never really got like that loft or the warmth like back into it like it had earlier in the hunt. So I decided I wanted to try some hybrid insulation. So this is the new Aerolite Jacket from Sitka. I'm not going to go into a great amount of detail, but it's essentially a synthetic insulation. It's like 90% air, and I think it's basically like this really fine webbed material that services the same function as like a down or a synthetic insulation, which is essentially creating pockets of air between you and the exterior so that you can protect the temperature from evacuating the entire system. So this will be my static insulation on the upcoming mule deer hunt, and this is kind of the piece that I'd wished I'd had on the sheep hunt. And then finally, we have the rain gear. So I've already told you I like the dew point system for a lot of applications. I ran it on the sheep hunt for the first time, did a bunch of brush busting. It really held up. It's surprisingly durable and feels surprisingly durable for how lightweight it is. Like, it's shocking how lightweight it is. And again, it serves that secondary wind stopper purpose. So a lot of the times when it's cold and windy, I will be hiking along in either just my base layer or maybe my base layer and my Kelvin active jacket. And here's another tip. Most people, when they hike to the top, you're gonna be all sweaty. And your first instinct is gonna be, I should let myself dry off before I put my puffy jacket on, because I don't want my puffy jacket to get wet from my body heat and moisture pushing the moisture out. Very counterintuitive. When you get to the top, you want to immediately put on your puffy jacket, because it's actually your body heat that is forcing that moisture away from your body. And if you sit down to glass while you're still wet and cold without putting on an additional static insulation layer, you are going to have a very hard time drying out those layers. So trust me, put on the puffy immediately. And if it's sprinkling outside, put the rain jacket over the puffy and just sit there. And after 45 minutes of an hour glassing, you're gonna realize that you're just drying from the inside out. And even if some of the moisture, it will go into your static insulation layer, but because you're retaining your body heat, that body heat is gonna keep pressing out, and it's gonna essentially act like a little limbo. Like, the water is gonna come out of your base layer, out of your active insulation, into your static insulation, and then out of your static insulation out to the outside. So that's what I would highly recommend. It's the exact same principle as when I get into my sleeping bag at night. My sleeping bag actually, if it's like the middle of the night, is probably a little damp because it has started to collect all the moisture that's coming out of the clothes that I'm wearing. But if I bring it all the way to the end of the night, then it's had enough time for the body heat to keep forcing that moisture out of the sleeping bag. And when I wake up, everything is dry. Okay, big kind of dump of information there. So real quickly, we have our base layer. We have a soft shell pant, some type of active insulation, some type of static insulation, and then some rain gear. When you start thinking about your clothing in this manner and start recognizing, okay, this piece is going to satisfy that. And here's something I find a lot of people bring two of certain things. Like, they'll bring two base layers when it's like, what, you're bringing two things that serve the exact same purpose. There's no need for it. This is all I bring. I don't bring backups of anything. One slight adjustment, I will bring two pair of underwear if the hunt is over 7 or 8 days. I'll go 7 or 8 days in the same pair, no problem. Socks, same rule. I will bring two pair if the hunt goes over 7 or 8 days. And I will say, it's kind of clickbaity to call this the 7 pieces of gear, because there's, by the time you think about hat and gloves and socks, I'm not saying it's the only thing you're going to put on your body, but as far as main pieces of clothing, these are the 7. So yeah, wrap your head around that. Start thinking of your clothing as a system, and then think about how everything you own fits into that system and maybe what holes you need to fill or how you need to rearrange the system for any given hunt. So one of the things I'm going to try and do from here on out is either just before or just after a hunt, I'll just do a quick update video. And using this system, I will go through why I picked each individual piece for a particular hunt that I'm about to do. Like I'm going mule deer hunting in about 4 weeks. So I will show you it's actually very minimal differences. Probably 1 or 2 pieces are going to get swapped out for something else. And that's why I think it's such a valuable system. I love things that reduce the amount of time I need to spend making decisions and kind of make things automatic. So thank you very much for your time. If you have any questions, please leave it down in the comments section below. And as always, thanks for tuning in.